Alrighty folks, thanks for clicking on this video. James Cards FC here, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2022/2023 Topps Chrome rookie checklist and who the most expensive rookies so far are on release week of the product. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe. I talk about the financial side of the soccer card market, and today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the Topps Chrome rookie class for this season and who's the most expensive right out of the gate. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with the introduction as always. Move myself into the top corner. And today we're going to be looking at the top 30 most expensive rookies on release week for 2022/2023 Topps Chrome. These prices will obviously shift over the course of the next few weeks, months, years, but this should be a fun one to look back on and an interesting way to see what the entry points are going to be like for these guys on release week. Remember, Sidney Rehbiger was among the top 5 most expensive players to kick off last season, and now nobody even knows who he is anymore. So, also keep in mind that in 99% of cases, it's better to wait a few weeks before purchasing any cards from a newly released product. This is because there is massive fear of missing out on and demand on release week, and low supply causes crazy release week prices. Normally, as more product gets opened and more supply comes on the market and more of these cards get sold, the fear of missing out decreases because those people have already bought their cards and the card prices drop very fast over the next few weeks. So, also keep in mind that we still have more set releases on the horizon, including Topps Chrome Sapphire, which is a more premium version of this same exact set that will probably hold more value than this set in the mid/long run. At least from what we understand based on previous years, that seems to be the case. And as always, this is not investment advice. Do your own research, and let's have some fun today talking about the prices people are paying for the different rookies in this year's class. So, moving forward with the price rankings. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. Feel free to screenshot it. This is the pricing data that comes from a player auction case break on eBay from June the 28th, which was the product release day. I just picked one of the random case breaks and listed out the prices that people paid for each of the slots on auction. I think this is the best way to get an idea of where the market is saying they're going to be paying for each of these players. And I'm also including the tiers list ranking that I gave the player in my previous video breaking down the class. If I did not end up ranking that player, I gave them an NR, which means not ranked, followed by the rank I would give them if I included them in my breakdown list. And you can see the list of the top 30 most expensive rookies that were paid for in this case break auction. And as you can see, Alejandro Garnacho is way ahead of everybody else, but there's some interesting names as we go through the list. I'm not going to spend any time on this slide, so feel free to screenshot it so you can see the prices and my player rankings. Obviously, you're going to want to make your own player rankings, but the prices are what the prices are at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and go forward to another slide where I break these prices out into a tiers list of the tiers that people are paying for these players. So, last chance to screenshot this, and we will be moving to the next slide. And this is where I'm going to spend most of the time talking on today's video. We're just going to have this page open, and I'm going to talk you through all the players in the tiers list based on how the market is pricing all of these guys right now on release week. So, at the very top in the S tier, same as my list, one player in S tier, Alejandro Garnacho. I've talked about him in the past already in my previous video where I broke down this class, and I think it's clear and obvious why he is the S tier. He's in a perfect club situation, perfect nationality situation. He's already performing for a very high level club. He's 18 years old, so all the ingredients are going for him in terms of being a superstar in the hobby. He does have to pan out and continue to play and eventually develop into a world-class player, but if he does so, everything is set in place for him to be a superstar for this hobby, so I understand why people are paying up for him. In the A tier, we have 6 players. I think in my list we had just 3. So these 6 players are being paid for in around the same price range, and I listed them all in the A tier for the market based on how they're being paid. So first we had Julian Alvarez. We talked about him already. Jamie Bino Gittins I had in B tier in my list, but I can understand why he's A tier here. He's probably one of the more well-known names in the checklist because he is English and plays for Dortmund, so a little bit of a priced-in effect there for him. Then we have Muhammad Ali Cho, who I did not include in my list because he was actually already in a few checklists prior to this one, but he does get the rookie designation from Topps Chrome. I don't find him personally all that interesting. If you asked me last year, I would have found him a lot more interesting than he is this year. If you go back a year, he was a very hot prospect in the French league. Then he moved to Real Sociedad in La Liga, and he did not have a good season at all. And so I would no longer be ranking him, but I can understand why some people are. If you believe he still is that player that he was when he was an exciting prospect in the French league, then I can understand paying the high prices for him out of the gate. But like I said, he did not have a good season in La Liga, and France has a lot of forward options, so I personally did not feel like ranking him in my list. If I were to rank him, I'd probably have him in a C or B tier. Then we have Enzo Fernandez, a guy, of course, that I didn't rank because he plays more of a holding midfield position. I understand why people are paying a high price for him because he plays in the Premier League and he was one of the stars of the World Cup. So name value and club value there, but in terms of his personal performance, I don't see how he's going to score goals or get in headlines to justify high prices. Then we have a guy I have no idea why he's ranked this high. It is Rooney Bardghji. I'm not actually sure how you pronounce his last name, but his first name is all that matters, and I think it's the reason why he's so expensive. His first name is Rooney. He is a 17-year-old Swedish attacking midfielder playing for Copenhagen. He had a few goals last season, I think 3 or 4 in the Denmark league that he plays in. I think Copenhagen's in Denmark. So he plays in a lower league, but he had a few goals at a young age. Even at the youth ranks, he didn't score all that much. In fact, if you go back and look at my previous video where I broke down the class, I talked about Noah Sasa. He plays for the exact same club, and he scored way more goals in the youth ranks than Rooney did, and nobody's paying anything for Sasa, and they're paying ridiculous amounts of money for Rooney. I don't understand this one. I don't get it. I might be completely missing something. I looked on Transfer Market. He's only valued at around $2 million in terms of transfer fees. So I don't see what the play is here. I think it's literally that he's just 17 years old and his name is Rooney. If his name was Noah Forsberg or something like that, then I don't think anybody would be paying this price for him. But since he's named Rooney and he's 17 years old and he has some goals, maybe that's why people are paying a high price for him. I don't understand it, but apparently people really like this kid, and maybe I'm completely wrong and I should be keeping tabs on him, but at least as of right now, I don't see a reason to rank him. In fact, if I had to, I'd probably put him in the D tier just because I don't see how he's going to score a bunch of goals if he hasn't already done so in a poorer league, and even in the youth ranks, he wasn't scoring at a really high rate. So not one for me, but perhaps one to keep an eye on in case I'm completely missing something there. Then we have Kolo Muani. I already talked about him. He's fantastic player, but he's 24 or 25 years old at this point, so you have to have that weighing against him. He needs to get a transfer to a big club like right away so that he can start putting up big numbers for a bigger club, and then maybe people get more excited. But yeah, just worry about his age. Fantastic player, probably one of the better forwards in the world last season in terms of his club performance. So fantastic player, just worried about age and hype and all that sort of stuff for the card market in particular. Then we move to the B tier where there's just 2 players. There's a big gap between what people are paying for the B tier guys and then the C tier below that. So there only happens to be 2 players there. And that's Warren Zaire-Emery and Mykhailo Mudryk. So with Zaire-Emery, I didn't rank him on my last list because he plays that central midfield position, doesn't really score a lot, hasn't really assisted a lot. So yeah, I don't really know where I would rank him. Probably C. I can understand B. He's really hyped because he got a lot of playing time during the Champions League, so people were able to see him. He had a few nice dribbles, that sort of thing. I don't know if he's ever going to score enough goals to be relevant, but he does play for PSG, and as long as Mbappe's there, there's going to be some spotlight there for him, so I can understand why people would be paying B-tier prices for Zaire-Emery. I just wouldn't be one of those people because I don't think he's going to score enough. Then we have Mudryk. I had him in A tier, but I can completely understand why people would have him in B tier. Like I said before, if Mudryk was still with Shakhtar, his prices would be more A tier and probably fringe S tier just because of how big of a prospect he was when he transferred to Chelsea. But the fact that he played so poorly there really knocked him down the hype spectrum. So that's what's going on with Mudryk. He also plays for a nationality that nobody really cares about and is probably not going to factor in major tournaments. So yeah, Mudryk is in B tier, but I obviously am very biased and I do like him quite a bit. But I personally won't actually be buying any of his cards because he's featured in a Chelsea kit. I was really hoping he'd be in a Shakhtar kit, but that's not the case. So I really don't need any of his stuff for my collection. Then we move down the list into the C tier. There are a lot of players in this C tier because there's just a lot of players that people are sort of taking a flyer on in this price range, and I'll go through all the names here. First, we have Rodrigo Ribeiro. I talked about him a bit in my previous video. I had him in D tier. He's a very, very young center forward in the Sporting system. Hasn't scored too much at the youth ranks, but he played in the Champions League at a really young age, so perhaps that's the reason why people are taking a flyer on him. It's also not such a bad idea, I guess, to take a flyer on a cheap striker that has a good nationality and a good club team that he's going to be playing for. So there are worse bets to be made, in my opinion. Then we move to a center forward that plays for the exact same youth system. This is Fatawu. He is actually Ghanaian, and he's winger / center forward for Sporting as well. He has not scored much in a while. Actually, leading into the World Cup, I was super interested in him, but I don't think he's scored for club or country since then. So that's a little troubling, but perhaps he can regain some form and get some hype going for himself. And then you have Moreira Jr. He also is owned in the Portuguese league systems. He is property of Benfica at this point, and he really doesn't have any stats to go off of. I wouldn't be ranking him because he doesn't really have any stats to go off of. He hasn't really scored much in the youth ranks, and since he hasn't scored much at the youth ranks, I really don't think there's much to talk about with him. Then we have Johan Bakayoko. He does put up stats in the Netherlands League. He's either 20 or 21, so he's still pretty young, but not a teenager, so that's probably the reason he's not getting higher prices. I had him in the C tier as well. I think he's one to keep an eye on in this set because I do think he could get some playing time in some pretty big matches. Then we have Santi Jimenez. I'm actually surprised he's in C tier, but given Mexico's really poor performance at the Nations League, perhaps people have really soured on them as a nation in general. So perhaps that's the reason he's brought down to the C tier. I thought actually he might be more B or A tier in terms of pricing just because he's a CONCACAF striker, but like I said, the fact that Mexico looks so bad right now is probably holding him back. In my opinion, he'd be one to keep an eye on here, just depending on where he ends up transferring and how he does feature in Mexico's squad going forward. Then we have Antonio Nusa. I had him in D tier, but the market is paying him in C tier. Makes sense. He was one of the youngest players in the Champions League this past season, and he scored a goal, so that brings some hype to his name, despite the fact he plays for a club that people don't really follow that much. Then you have Pablo Torre. He's a center mid, I think, in Barcelona's system. He's stuck behind Pedri, he's stuck behind Gavi, he's stuck behind any midfielder they bring in on top of those two. So I don't see how he has any path to playing time, but he plays for Barcelona, so people are going to pay prices for him. After him, you have another Copenhagen winger. I actually don't even know who this is. If he was important or notable, I would probably know who it was, but I don't. He doesn't score a lot of goals for Copenhagen, so I will just go ahead and step past him, and we'll see if that comes back to haunt me and he ends up being some sort of superstar for Copenhagen and Denmark. Next time, you have Gabriel Veron. He was, at least a couple years ago, a big hot prospect in Brazil as a teenager, transferred finally to Porto, and he has not really done anything there. I think he had maybe 1 or 2 goals this past season, but he's still pretty young. He's either 20 or 21 and still trying to find his footing there in the Portuguese league, so maybe eventually he brings back the form that he once had in Brazil. Then you have Schlotterlup, or however you pronounce his name. I obviously know who he is. I've talked about him previously. He is a Norway winger that is now owned by Benfica. He really didn't feature for them at all after transferring to them in the winter break. Kind of a letdown there in terms of his transfer because people thought he was going to be a pretty big player, at least for the future for them, but that hasn't shown to be the case yet. So definitely one to keep an eye on, at least in my opinion. Then you have Samuel Illing Jr. He is English, and he is owned currently by Juventus. He has almost no stats even in youth leagues, so I don't have much to go off of there, and I don't have much to talk about because he doesn't have any data backing him. Then you have Hugo Ekitike. This is the biggest difference in terms of where I had a player ranked to where the market is ranking them. Does that mean anything? Absolutely not, because it's just my opinion versus the opinion of the entire market. But I did have him in A tier. I think he has a lot of opportunity, assuming PSG doesn't bring in a couple more forwards to start for PSG and pick up some of the goals that were left off by Messi and whoever else leaves PSG in this window. I think he is in a good spot for opportunity. He obviously still needs to produce, though. Then you have this is Valentin Carboni. Next to Dybala, as some people call him, for Inter Milan. Doesn't really have a lot of stats to go off of. I had him in D tier, but I can understand why some people would be paying for him in a C tier role. And finally, we'll move down to the D tier of players. These are the cheapest players that I made the cutoff list at 30. I know I think there's 60 rookies in this class, but I cut it off at 30, and these are the ones that people are paying the least for. First, we have Kobbie Mainoo, I think is how you pronounce his name. If you are playing FIFA or Football Manager, this guy is an amazing center defensive mid prospect in terms of his potential for the future, but the fact that he plays center defensive mid means that the hobby probably doesn't care about him going forward. He does play for Manchester United, but other than that, I don't see a lot going for him because I don't think he's ever going to be scoring or assisting on goals. Then you have, I think this is Oliver Skip, maybe Ollie Watkins, Oliver something. I accidentally cut off the names in terms of the D tier on this PowerPoint. Bad positioning there by myself, but I know he plays for Spurs, and he's an academy-ish midfield prospect, so I don't see anything going on there, but feel free to disagree. Then next to him, we have Noah Sasa. I like him as the lottery ticket type guy. I understand why he's in D tier. I definitely wouldn't be paying up for him because all he has is a bunch of youth academy goals, and that's it. But if I was choosing between him and Rooney, I would be valuing them the same, so I have no idea why he is in the D tier and Rooney is in the A tier when they are both the same age, they play in the same system, and Sasa scores more in the youth ranks than Rooney did. But perhaps some Copenhagen supporters can let me know why that's the case, but at least based on the data, I do not understand why their discrepancy is so far. Then we have another Copenhagen winger that doesn't score goals, so I didn't include him. And then next to him, we have Fabio Carvalho. I didn't include him despite the fact that he's a really good real-life player. I don't think that translates into cards because he's a attacking midfielder that has not scored or assisted a lot. So I don't really see a place for him in terms of the hobby conversation because you need to be able to assist, score goals, or be fancy with dribbles. And at least so far for Liverpool, Carvalho has not been that type of player. Perhaps he gets a loan move elsewhere or transfers somewhere else where he can score more, but at least right now I can understand why he is in the D tier. Next to him, we have Desiree Douillet, a player that I like a heck of a lot more for real life than I do for the hobby. Like I talked about in my previous video, he has played pretty much every midfield or attacking position for his club in the French league. Despite the fact that he's been either 17 years old or 18 years old, he's played like 40 matches of the top league in France already. Plays every position. He's played center forward, he's played wing, he's played midfield, he's played left midfield, he's played literally everywhere. But the problem is if he gets stuck in just playing center mid and doesn't score goals and doesn't assist, then his ceiling is very limited in the hobby. So it's all going to depend on where they potentially move him long term. He did play most of his games this season at center mid, so unfortunately I think they're going to pigeonhole him there, and it'll be up to whoever he transfers to determine where he's going to play for the long term. Like I compared him to in my previous video, he's a lot like Camavinga in the sense that he can do attacking things, but the team that he's playing for prefers him to play more of that center mid role, and it's possible that if he transfers to a bigger club, they will also see him as more of that center mid role, and that just really takes away from his ultimate ceiling because he could be a goal scorer, but if he's not playing in that position, he's just not going to be able to do that. So for all those reasons, I can understand why he's in D tier, but I really do like his talent. Then next to him, you have his teammate. I think this is Arnaud Calimundo. He's a 21, I think, year old center forward / wing prospect for the exact same team as Desiree Douillet. He scored a little bit, and he's valued pretty highly by Transfer Market. I think $20 million or something like that. You can check my previous video where I broke down a bunch of these players to find out more about him, but I had him in D tier as well, so I can understand why the market has him in D tier. And then finally, we have Roko Simic. He is this year's center forward prospect for Salzburg. Like I said in my video, I had him in C tier. I worry about his playing time, but if he does end up getting that playing time, Salzburg is a really good factory for scoring goals and getting big transfers. So if he does break through and ends up being the starter for Salzburg, which is a long shot at this point because he's 3rd or 4th on their depth chart, then he would be able to progress up this list. But the problem is he's 3rd or 4th in the depth chart right now. Alrighty, we got through it. And with that, we will lead into the conclusion. So, these rankings will shift and could shift fast. At the end of this next season, we'll be lucky to still be talking about 4 or 5 of these players as being hobby relevant. As I've explained before, from last year's class, we only have 2 players that are still hobby relevant. Those would be Gavi and Jonathan David, and they've fallen a lot from release date in terms of their position in the hobby as well as their prices. Gavi was thought of as one of the top like 3 or 4 prospects in the world, not just in this class, and now he's not really that type of player or talked about in terms of that type of player. And then you have Jonathan David, who was in that sort of top 10, 20-ish prospects that the hobby was really paying attention to. And now he's really fallen off back into like the 30s or 40s range in terms of the prospects that people are looking at. So yeah, a lot of these guys will be priced highly on release, and they'll have all these expectations, and then they won't meet them. And they'll probably end up like a lot of the guys in the previous checklist. There's going to be a lot of Anthony Lanyas. There's going to be a lot of Sidney Raybiggers. There's going to be a lot of fill in whatever player that didn't end up making it, a lot of Cole Palmers, a lot of Liam Delaps. Those sorts of guys are going to be all over this checklist. We just don't know who that is yet. So, what we've seen from the past couple seasons, it's the players that have the low expectations and exceed them that bring the greatest price increases, not necessarily the ones that start out of the gates expensive and then need to play at a world-class level just to hold their prices. Normally, you'd want to be targeting guys that don't start off in the S or A or B tiers, but guys in the lower tiers that could then progress into the higher tiers and build more hype for them. It's a lot harder for a guy like Garnacho to continue to play at a world-class level and hold his spot than it is for a guy in, say, the D tier to move up to the B or the A tier. And with all that out of the way, of course, enjoy the new Chrome set and try to buy and prospect and do all that sort of stuff responsibly. And I'll leave you with this nice little meme here. Corporate needs to identify the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture. It's Rooney and it's Sidney Raybiger. That would be my comparison for Rooney at this point. We'll see if this one ends up haunting me in the future and he becomes some sort of world-class player for Copenhagen and then transfers to Madrid or something like that. But at least based off his stats, I just don't see it. I cannot understand why people are paying the prices are for Rooney at this point, but that could just be me. So, with all that out of the way, I thank you guys for so much for watching this video. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that sort of fun stuff, and I will see you in the next video.